Hey guys, Wolfie here and welcome back to the channel. As always, the usual disclaimer. Any opinion here is mine and mine alone. Now, this is a special presentation tied to Volume 9, Chapter 6 for RWBY. And it is about a certain character in the sense of, like, is there a potential death tied to the character coming? Now, we're going to go over, like, briefly the character who I'm going to be referring to, the real-life individual the character is based on. Go over later, a little bit later, the certain important things to know about the real life person, as well as after that, will the character get that person's death in the show? Two potential people who could be tied to the character's death, where hints could go, like for either of the two candidates. And it will be a bit of a clear-cut case, or is it too tough to call? Now, the character I'm referring to here is Jaune Arc. And the reason why I'm referring to him here is that, and this is a prediction of mine, I do feel he is going to be a dead man come the end of Volume 9. Now, why do I say this? Because the character, Jaune Arc, he's based off of a real-life individual. Now, for those of you who remember Nikos, she was based off of a real-life individual too, and what happened, she got killed the same exact way that the real-life individual did back in the day. Now, I do want to go into a, I'm going to go off topic for a little bit, but it is very important to this particular video for a specific reason. Now, for Ren and Nora, both of them are based off of not only a literature character, which is Ren, but Nora, she's based off of Norse mythology, more specifically Thor. Now, for Mulan and Thor, those two has pretty interesting deaths in this speak. For Mulan, is that she was going to be living a certain way. It's something she didn't want to do. So it's one of those types of death where it's like she asked somebody to kill her, like a mercy kill, because she didn't want to live a certain way. Although beforehand she had a bit of a letter to that she had in her possession to make sure they had given to somebody else to give to a specific recipient. So it's one of those things. And then if you look at, so that's basically with Mulan. So she asked somebody to kill her because she didn't want to live a certain way. Now, regarding Thor was bit by a snake. However, the poisonous bite was fatal. And with that, Nora and Ren live because Penny took both of those deaths. And by both Mulan and Thor. So that means Ren and Nora do live on because of Penny's sacrifice. Because Penny wanted Jaune to kill her. And because she didn't want to live a certain way. And I don't blame Penny in the sense because I don't really think she wanted to be a winner, a maiden for any element at all. I don't blame her. So she took the quote-unquote, a fatal hit from Cinder in order to do so. But that is just my 2 cents on that aspect. But like I said, the reason why it is important because, you're talking about Team Juniper. And we all know that Puri, got the initial shot into the Achilles heel, and then she got shot in the chest. That's how the person she's based off of died in that way. That's how she died at the end of Volume 3. Now, like I said, for Volume 9, I do feel that Jaune's going to get the Joan of Arc death. Now, who is Joan of Arc? Now, Joan of Arc, she was a real-life individual. Now, before I go further into this particular video, I will mention that I blurted out some incorrect information about Joan of Arc. I got social media in recent times, so this is one of those portions of the video where I am 100% owning up to that. It's something I should have been paying a little bit closer attention to, but again, this is very much Joan of Arc, a real-life individual from the country of France. So basically what happened in Joan of Arc, she was burned alive and is at the stake for heresy. Now, what heresy is pretty much like saying screw this, screw that, over in favor of something else. So, and then that's the time frame where she died, which was the 30th of May, 1431. And she was born in 1412, so we do know she had her 19th birthday at some point beforehand. So basically, she was. So this is where she was burned alive. So she was burned at the stake for heresy. This is a ruin in the English-controlled Normandy. So there was a part of like France that was controlled by the British. Now, I do want to mention here, in addition, is that the time frame where Joan of Arc was alive, and this is another part where I got it incorrect. I thought it was the Renaissance period. It was actually the time frame just before it. And by that, the Middle Ages / Dark Ages. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I got that part incorrect too. But I do know now that it was it was just before the Renaissance, meaning that Dark Ages, Middle Ages, and to be more specific, this was around the 100 Years' War. And I know this part in this article from history is that it was between the English and the French. So I'm not going to go into the article itself, but I do want to point out some important aspects of the article. Because you're talking about a real life individual tied to a fictional character. Because the fictional character is based off of a real life individual. So we got here, she was a daughter of a tenant farmer on RWBY. And then again, the 100 Years' War between England and France. And then you're talking about this particular war, which was part of an ongoing set of battles of wars known as the Crusades. The Crusades was approximately 450 years of war over religion, if that makes any sense. And it was after, when it was during the Renaissance, it was when the Christian church separated themselves from Roman Catholicism in due time. So basically, this is there's a bunch of stuff here that I'm not going to go over because I just don't want to waste too much time going over this. So the whole thing with Joan of Arc, she was a knight for for a few years, and a male knight is just knight, that's that. But however, a female knight is known as a dame. So that's down that. And then, whole thing with Notre Dame, the latter being a noted school here in the U.S. I'm not going to go into that aspect, so to speak. So it was around a time when she started to become a knight, she heard voices in her head. We're talking St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret. Now, the whole thing with Jaune Arc and the RWBY, is pretty much heading in that same exact direction as Joe, meaning that he's hearing voices in his head. And it's telling them what exactly to do. Now, I do feel the part right here is extremely important because you have to remember in Volume 6, it looks like Jean was hearing some format of voices when he blurted out, to steal a plane to get into Alice. Which was entirely different than Blake's original idea earlier on in that volume. And we know how Blake's idea earlier on in Volume 6, it felt flat quick. Because there were a lot of things that Blake should have looked into beforehand. And it's something she chose to not do. And to make things a little bit more interesting, back in Volume 6, Yang blindly agreed with Blake. Although RWBY was like, something might not sound right, as she understood wisest concerns over the matter. So these are three individuals that were like saying, hey, you should do this to Joan, which is in a similar manner to Jean in the sense of like three individual voices that Jean was hearing in the sense of like ideas, so to speak. Now you have other information here like May 1428, all that stuff right here. Some stuff in January 1429. And then we're going to see here, I'm going to just go for like, drag into the articles. There's a lot of stuff that's not important for this video, but you guys can look this up on your own time. So we have all this stuff here. And then we're going to just go into things like when she gets captured, all that stuff. So let's see here. Let's see if I can get it correct. So it was late May 1430 where she was captured by the Burgundians, in sense of when she was leading a sortie against them. So it's she got caught. And this is when she was 18, I believe. So this is one of those things where we're going to be seeing something probably between chapter 7 through 9 in volume 9 about this. So we're probably going to be seeing something like this happen where Jean tries to do something and he gets caught. Now, with that bit out of the way, we see here is a bit of a back and forth between her trial, sentencing, all that stuff. Meaning that she was basically put on trial for heresy, as I mentioned. And it mentions here the rejection of church authority in favor of direct inspiration from God. Which, I mentioned witchcraft is reasons tied to it. Now, again, that can be interpreted as misinformation. However, if you think about the whole thing with quote-unquote witchcraft at the time, hearing voices, that could be, a form of the such, meaning that if you hear voices in this time frame, the early mid 15th century, that could be seen as a form of witchcraft. So take whatever I say on social media as you will. So basically here it's this is heresy and rejection of church authority in favor of direct inspiration from God. Which, like I said, could be seen as a form of witchcraft. Because you have to remember, for those of us in the U.S., you have the Salem witch trials, which is kind of the same thing. So we have here, it's a bunch of stuff. It's she was originally supposed to be executed, but she agreed to recant and condemned to perpetual imprisonment instead. However, it was not even a week later, where it's she's up to her shenanigans again, about, in more particular, St. Margaret, St. Catherine reproached her for giving into the church against their will. So it looks like on the 29th, the day before, she was executed, they were screw this imprisonment, you're dead. And then the next day, she was burned at the stake for heresy, as well as, I'm going to go back up here so I can get the actual information here. So heresy as well as rejection of church authority in favor of direct inspiration from God. Which means is that at this particular time frame, the Christian church were separating themselves gradually from the Catholic Church. Because, but he said, she said as to how the information from the Holy Bible. But that's a kind of different topic for a different day. So here on the 30th of May was burned at the stake at Place de Vimoche in Rouen. So before the pier she was on got lit, she was telling a priest basically to hold a crucifix high above her so she could see it, and shout out prayers loud enough to be heard over the roar of the flames. So this is pretty much what happened as she was dying. So smoke inhalation. And then also, I think there was some other sources were saying that she was being tricked to be burned a second time, which would have been unnecessary and overkill in my personal opinion. Now, in the aftermath of Joan of Arc's death in real life, now it was she pretty much inspired the French, to get their acts together, and it wound up, when it comes to this 100 Years' War, this went out in the end in the favor of France. In 1453, it was Charles VII who had reconquered all of France except for Calais. And it was in 1558 that Calais was relinquished to France by England. Now, it wasn't until nearly 400 years after the relinquishment of Calais to France from England that Joan of Arc was then made a patron saint of France. And that was 1920. But before I go in a little bit further into this video with this tied to Jean, I will have the link to this article in the description below, so that way you guys can look at this in your own time, because it's really important to know when it comes to fictional characters based off of real life characters. This is information that is absolutely necessary to take in. So with that bit out of the way, you look at Joan of Arc, her life, what happened, and things in the afterlife. Make sure my contact isn't acting up. So regarding the afterlife of Joan of Arc, where it's it inspired the French to get their acts together to fight back against England. It's it's really saying, hey, get your acts together. This is your country. Fight for it. So it's basically that. And then you look at the 1500s, where it's France was you guys saw what went on. Then in the let me rephrase it. So basically 1453 was basically saying France got its act together. Then you had the 1500s, where it's Calais was the final piece, where it was relinquished to France. Then you had 1920, Joan of Arc was made a patron saint. So with all this with John, yes, I do think he is a death coming in Volume 9. Now, a clue that kind of hints on this, and this is something I should have saved a photo of, is that what was made to make his house. The two items that were said to be responsible for making his house are paper and wood. Now, what do those two items have in common? They are both susceptible to fire. Meaning that somehow it looks like John's house is going to be burned to the core, and John's going to be the one inside of it. That's how he dies. So, I said, as we have all this stuff out of the way, we know that Jaune Arc here is based off of Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc was burned to the stake for heresy, as well as rejection of church authority in favor of direct inspiration from God. We all know that. But after she died, it inspired a lot of people to get their act together. And it was several hundred years later that Joan of Arc was later made a patron saint of France. Now, with the whole thing with Jaune Arc's house being made of paper and wood, he's going to be burned alive at his home. That's his stake. Now, who are the top two candidates that could pull this sort of thing off? The first one will surprise you. The second one won't surprise you. Now, the character that won't surprise anyone in the sense of killing John here is Neo. Now, how is Neo the not surprising character? Now, the thing here is that she holds a grudge against Team RWBY, especially RWBY. The thing to keep in mind here is that if you remember the beginning of Volume 9, where it's RWBY and Neo were fighting was that at one point in that fight, Neo transformed into Yang. So if it is Neo that kills Jaune, what she's probably going to be doing is transforming into Yang to do so. Which, in a sense, it is a bit surprising, but it's also not surprising because you have to remember Neo and Yang have fought against each other in Volume 2. Yang was only saved by Raven at that point. So that's the not surprising candidate, in the sense of Neo. She takes Yang's form and kills Jaune like that. The second potential candidate, and this one that is a bit of a surprise, is Yang Xiaolong herself. Now, the reason why Yang comes along here is because she controls the element of fire through her hair. Now, for those of you who remember RWBY Chibi, it was like the remainder of the team were poking at her hair, and then it's like, at the end, you have RWBY, RWBY, Weiss, and Blake were making roasting marshmallows, making s'mores, because Yang's hair went up in flames. So with that, I do feel something is probably going to happen in the sense of Yang being the one that kills Jaune here, because of the fact that she has more control of the element of fire than Neo does, even though Neo takes on her form. Now, the whole thing with Yang, and the reason why it is surprising is because it will come down to towards the end, the sense of the tree coming to RWBY. Now, the whole thing here is just that you have to remember Volume 9, Chapter 6, it's Yang got pissed off in the sense of information the Curious Cat withheld from her, although the response from Curious Cat was, "You never asked." Which I'm going to get into that quotation when I review Volume 9. Because I do feel that whole response from Curious Cat about that whole debacle with the herbalist, it's I do have something on that. It's I want to make sure I think this one as thoroughly as possible. So, but yet it's going to be coming down to the tree visiting RWBY, and RWBY's going to have to make a really difficult decision. But it comes down to that is a potential possibility, or something else happens and Yang kills Jaune on her own, transforming her to be more like Raven or Adam. Because you have to remember, both Raven and Adam had, kills of their own, in which, you could tell the whole thing with Raven killing the previous Spring Maiden based off the conversation between Yang and Raven back at the end of Volume 5. Now, is this a clear-cut, path in the sense of, who kills Jaune? Unfortunately, no. Because although Neo poses as Yang, it's going to be Neo has to pose as Yang and spearhead the entire thing. But it's we don't have enough information at this time to actually prove it. But it's something that wouldn't surprise me if that does become the case, in the sense of Neo takes Yang's form, and we know that Neo's semblance has evolved in the sense of multiple clones of herself. We have that part. And then, the whole thing when Neo spearheads Jaune's death that way. So we have that angle. Now with Yang herself, it becomes a little bit more surprising, and becomes maybe a little bit more obvious in the sense. It's something happens where it's either, again, the tree visits RWBY, they have to make a really difficult decision that way. Or if the tree tells RWBY who does she sacrifice, and if she sacrifices herself, it may anger Yang in response. So Yang kind of would probably have to get really angry at a decision RWBY makes, because some of the hints have been there the entire time. Where it's you really want to do this, RWBY? You really want to do this, RWBY? And then a whole thing back in the beginning of Volume 9 where it's like, Yang tells RWBY, you weren't supposed to be here. Which means that there is some exclusion in Team RWBY that's going to come to a head. And if, depending on what RWBY decides to, in the sense of like who gets sacrificed, could mean, if RWBY leaves herself behind, Yang's abandonment issues resurrect, and in a fit of anger, she sets the house Jaune is in ablaze, killing Jaune. And then Jaune will be screaming something like over the flames. But it inspires a lot of people to, fight back. Which I say in the end here to recap all this stuff, it's like Jaune is a dead man. But the question comes down to is who kills him. And unfortunately, the jury is out at this moment in time. But there are stronger possibilities for either Neo or Yang to do the kill. Because with Neo, she has a grudge against RWBY. As well as Team RWBY. Jaune dies, with Neo posing as Yang via the whole phrasing, guilty by association. So that is one possibility, as well as, Neo spearheading it. Now another possible person that kills Jaune is Yang herself. Because remember, she killed Adam with Blake. But let's just say Yang's the one who kills Jaune. This makes her to be a little more like Raven than she previously wanted to be. Because you have to remember part of the conversation at the end of Volume 5 where Raven's like, you don't want to do this. But Yang's like, screw this, I'm going to do it anyway. Which means not heeding certain warnings shows Yang who she really is. She becomes more like Raven. And in the whole thing with the RWBY being a catalyst, it comes down to who RWBY chooses to sacrifice. And RWBY can either sacrifice Yang and Blake, because the way she saw them, with their hands in chapter 6 of volume 9, or some of the hints that have been coming along the entire time, and no one's really been paying attention. Alongside no one paying attention to RWBY's state of mind. So, to end this particular video, Jaune is a dead man, but the jury is currently out on who kills him. Because we are probably going to see that he is going to get the Joan of Arc death. And remember, Pyridikos in Volume 3 had her death. I forgot the name of the person she's based off of. But that was another real-life individual. So you're talking a character death based off of death of a real-life person. So it comes down to, will it be Neo, either via the spearheading while she poses as Yang? Or is it going to be Yang herself based on certain decisions from RWBY? And until we see information between chapters 7, 8, and or 9, my personal prediction here is right now is going to be Neo posing as Yang and spearheading it. But there's a part of me that won't be surprised if Yang herself does it. Because it's going to come down to the tree visiting RWBY. And something tells me that RWBY might sacrifice herself for the rest of the team to go home. And then you have to remember the story from Jaune is that when Alyx returned to wherever, she had to make a sacrifice. She may sacrifice somebody so that she could go back. And we may see the same exact thing here with RWBY. It's either going to be herself or Yang. And if RWBY sacrifices Yang, she burns Jaune's house to the stake with Jaune in the house as retaliation. or she does the same thing with Jaune after RWBY sacrifices herself. So it's one of those things where we have to wait and see, but I do think Jaune is a dead man here. And I'm done with this video. With Wolvie here signing off, I will catch you all on the flip side.